This is Tanveer Mohammed Masood once again, and in today's talk, I'll be having a look into certain economic concepts. Of late, I have started speaking on certain economic concepts, and in my previous talk, I was discussing certain concepts of economics, like that of inflation and deflation, and what exactly and how exactly it impacts our economic growth. In fact, every country, be it in any part of the world, and every country, every nation has to pass through a certain amount of inflation. In fact, I've also explained in details as to how exactly it impacts our economic development, and how important it is for our sustenance as well. A little amount or certain amount of inflation is indeed necessary for certain development work to be undertaken. For example, investment, production, and other important economic issues are quite interrelated with inflation. So this was got to do with inflation and deflation. But as of now, today I'll be talking on budget. I'll be trying to discuss as to how and why exactly it's important to prepare a budget, and how it impacts our development as well. So in a very literal term, budget basically means a summary of income and expenditure for a given year, that is basically prepared in adherence to certain guidelines of a certain nation or a country. In fact, a budget is necessary to find out as to how exactly and where exactly the revenues and the incomes as well as expenditures which are in the offing can be made for a given year. This is a very literal term of budget. It's basically a summary, as I said, a shortcut of income and expenditure that is to be made for a given year or for a given financial year. Well, it is important for every country or every nation, be it in any part of the world, to prepare a budget to find out as to how can it meet a given amount of expenditure, or how can it go on to undertake certain economic initiatives and developmental initiatives with a given amount of income in a given year. The government has to take several developmental initiatives for its people. In fact, even kings in past days, during the days of the ancient period, or any other past rulers, and during the periods of, for example, Mughals or any other past period in the very old period, they used to prepare. In fact, they used to prepare a summary of events that are they are going to take for their people, for their subject, and for that there was a separate department for theirs, the department which used to prepare a summary of all the events that are going to take place as far as economic and developmental initiatives are concerned. And there were a certain amount of fund that was kept separate for that initiative, and they used to find out as to how exactly they are going to meet their expenditures of such developmental work with a given amount of income or a given amount of fund that is in there for that purpose. So if we prepare in the same way, we prepare a budget, a summary of events that are going to take place in a given year, we can find out as to how much fund is needed to make sure that a developmental work is undertaken by a given amount of fund, and if there is any sort of deficit in that, the government or the king can undertake, or rather can borrow from the people, can raise money by way of several initiatives. These days, there are several methods of raising money from the public as well. We call it public debt in a strict economic concept, raising of fund from public, it's called, or rather borrowing of funds from the public, common public, from its subject. It's called public debt in strict economic concept or strict economic term. For example, if the income increases and the revenue increases and the expenditure decreases in a given budget, then it means it's a capital budget, it's a good budget, and if the reverse happens, then it's a negative budget. We call it a budget deficit in very strict economic term out here, and it basically means that the expenditure has increased and the corresponding revenue or income hasn't increased at the same pace to sustain the expenditure, to support the expenditure that is in there for the economy. We call it a deficit budget, and in such cases there are certain methods to raise money and raise fund. As I said, public debt is one of the most appropriate and most legal method employed these days to raise money from the public so as to sustain certain economic initiatives and to make good the deficit budget that has occurred in a given year. And I thought this is one of the most appropriate method that can be employed by any economy, be it in any part of the world, and it's one of the most, as I said, most legible method of raising fund, and it can also be used to mitigate the losses that have occurred in a given year. I was trying to explain the advantages and the benefits of budget. As I said, there are certain huge and very important outcomes of preparing a budget, because it gives us a very important and integrated approach towards making sure as to whether the income of the king or the government is enough to meet the given year's expenditure, and if it's not in there, there are, as I said, methods to make sure that there are enough funds for the government to make sure that government, or rather economic initiatives or developmental initiatives, are not halted or not stopped because of shortage of funds or money that should be in there by way of revenue. Moreover, apart from this advantage, there are certain other disadvantages as well of preparing a budget. It basically helps us to make sure that all the funds that are in there are basically kept, rather are basically there are this appropriate and proper calculation of all the funds that are in there, and that any misappropriation or any embezzlement of a fund can be also avoided if we have a complete and good record of all the funds or money that are in there for all sorts of purposes and for any sort of, as I said, economic and developmental initiatives that are basically to be undertaken in a given year. In fact, the budget of the government